It was the 4th of March, 1906, in the prosperous valley town of Stockton, California. The almond trees along El Dorado Street had begun to show their first white blossoms, and the morning air carried the cool mineral sharpness of the San Joaquin River not far to the north. Stockton was a city of commerce and movement, a place where goods and people passed through on their way to the mining settlements of the Sierra Nevada foothills. The railway station on Market Street stood at the heart of this traffic, busy from the first morning train to the last of the evening. In one of the upper rooms of the nearby Stockton Hotel, a woman named Emma McVicar, registered under a different name as was her custom, had spent the previous night with a man whose fortunes by that morning were running out, and she was 30 years old. She had been married 3 times. She had buried one husband and was presently, though none at the hotel yet knew it, married to 2 more. By nightfall, a chest she had purchased that same morning would be sitting uncollected on the station platform, and a smell no amount of discretion could disguise would draw the attention of every constable within the hour. What waited inside that chest would expose a history of deception that had stretched across 3 counties and 6 years of careful reinvention. Emma Cole was born on the 10th of September, 1875, in the small settlement of Pine Grove, Amador County, California. It was a modest place, built on the edges of a landscape that had been torn open by the gold rush and left half-mended, a country of worked-out claims, stubborn ranchers, ancient families who had stayed after the fortune-seekers had moved on. Emma's upbringing was comfortable in a material sense. Her parents provided what they could. What they could not provide was peace, for theirs was a marriage sustained largely by argument and habit, and Emma grew up to the sound of domestic grievance. By the time she was 16, she had left. On the 2nd of March, 1892, with her mother's consent and a young rancher's proposal before her, Emma Cole became Emma Barrett. She was, by California's own measure of the age, young to wed. The average age for a woman in the state to marry was 22. Emma was barely half that. The marriage endured through the early years of her womanhood, but fractured quietly, as many such early unions do, the couple growing in directions that did not meet, and by 1898 they were formally divorced. Among the grounds submitted was a claim that Emma had been seen in the company of other men. Within months of the dissolution of that first marriage, she had entered a second. William Williams was an Englishman, 3 years her senior, who had come to the American West to find his fortune in the mines. He was a steady man by most accounts, earnest and hard-working, and he persuaded Emma to leave Amador County and its gossiping memory of her first marriage behind. They traveled south and east, to Bisbee, a copper mining town in the Arizona Territory where the railway had arrived in 1889, and the population was rising sharply on the back of ore extracted from the hills. Bisbee was new enough that no one needed to know much about anyone's past. There William found work in the mines. Emma kept house. It seemed by the outward measure of things a second chance. Then, on the 20th of June, 1902, William Williams died. He was 30 years old. He had been considered robust and healthy. The cause of death was recorded as gastroenteritis, an inflammation of the gut, sudden and absolute. It was said by several in the town to be highly suspicious. Nothing more, however, was thought of it at the time. Emma collected the insurance payment, which amounted to nearly $10,000, and set about her next arrangement. Even before the death of William Williams, a man named Albert McVicar had been remarked upon. He was a Canadian, born in 1869, 6 years Emma's senior, who had followed the mining industry south into the United States and found his way to Bisbee. Rumors had circulated there, as rumors do in small towns quietly and persistently, that Emma had been seen with McVicar during her husband's lifetime. When confronted, she had dismissed the speculation as idle gossip. William, it appeared, had accepted this answer. He would not be in a position to reconsider it. On the 1st of September, 1902, less than 3 months after William's death, Emma married Albert McVicar. He was, by all who knew him, very much in love with her. The feeling did not appear to be equally distributed. Emma missed her mother. She missed the particular light and smell of Amador County. She told Albert, with apparent sincerity, that her mother was aging and required regular visits. so her mother was in perfectly good health. Emma began to travel back to California with increasing frequency. With each visit, the time spent in Arizona shortened. Albert worked, waited, and hoped. In California, Emma was not idle. She was courted by a man named Eugene LeDoux, a childhood acquaintance from Pine Grove, gentle in manner and imperfectly educated, whom many in the county considered not entirely capable of reading and writing. She accepted his attentions. She also received the visits of a man named Joseph Healy, a plumber by trade, with whom she developed what observers described as a flirtatious familiarity. She was, throughout this period, still legally the wife of Albert McVicar. This did not appear to weigh upon her. On the 26th of August, 1905, Emma married Eugene LeDoux, but the ceremony was conducted in California. No annulment, no divorce, no legal severance from Albert McVicar had been obtained. Emma had become a bigamist. Albert, in Bisbee and then later in Jamestown, where he had found new work with a mining company, was unaware. He continued to think of Emma as his wife. He continued to hope that she would return. When she did visit him, the visits were brief and irregular. He took lodgings near his work. He sent letters. He planned. He knew nothing of Eugene LeDoux. In March of 1906, Albert McVicar and Emma traveled together to San Francisco. They stayed at the Lexington Hotel. That evening, Albert became suddenly and seriously ill. Emma summoned the house physician, who arrived promptly and, after examining his patient, stated his opinion plainly. Albert had been poisoned, and Albert recovered. The episode was noted, and then, perhaps through relief, perhaps through something else, permitted to recede. The couple met again in Stockton. Albert believed, or chose to believe, that this was a new beginning. Emma had agreed that they would rent a house together in Jamestown, not far from his work. They visited a furniture store on the morning of the 4th of March, 1906, and selected items for the home: chairs, a table, the ordinary furnishings of a life expected to continue. Albert was feeling unwell again by mid-morning. Emma left him at the hotel and went out alone. She purchased a large wooden chest at a hardware store and arranged for it to be delivered to room 97 of the Stockton Hotel. Then she returned to the furniture merchant and redirected the goods she and Albert had ordered that morning, instructing the merchant that the items should be sent instead to the address of Eugene LeDoux, whom she described as her brother. She then bought rope at another hardware store. She sent a telegraph to Joseph Healy in San Francisco, asking that he meet her that evening at the Royal House on Eddy Street. The chest arrived at the hotel shortly after midday. Emma asked the delivery man to return within the hour, as she would need it transported to the station once she had finished packing. When he returned, the chest was ready and sealed. It was too heavy for one man alone. A second hand was enlisted. Together they moved it to the platform. Emma left with another man. At the station, while a clerical error meant the chest was never properly registered, it was dragged to the baggage room and left. By that evening, the smell had become impossible to ignore. The station officer sent for police. Constables arrived, recognized the odor from experience, and opened the lid. Inside, fully dressed but lacking shoes, lay the body of a man. He was later identified, through the hotel's guest book and through a photograph found in the abandoned room, as Albert McVicar of Bisbee, Arizona. The post-mortem examination was ordered at once. The body of Albert McVicar was conveyed to the city morgue, where it was placed on public view, a practice not uncommon in that era, when the identification of the unknown dead was still a matter partly delegated to public curiosity. People of every station queued to view the man from the chest. The authorities grew uncomfortable. They recognized that the spectacle threatened to become something unseemly, and moved to accelerate the formal proceedings. The medical examination was conducted with the rigor that the case demanded. The results were unambiguous in some respects, complicated in others. Morphine was detected in the body. Chloral hydrate, a sedative compound in common use as a sleeping draught, was also present, though in a quantity that the examining physician considered insufficient, on its own, to have caused death. The coroner's findings pointed instead to blunt force trauma to the head as the primary cause of death. There was further suggestion, based on the condition of the body, that Albert McVicar had been alive, unconscious but alive, when he was placed inside the chest. The evidence was catalogued and forwarded. Albert's pocket watch and chain were noted as missing from the room. Emma's description was circulated to neighbouring towns and cities by telegraph. On the Monday morning following the discovery, a woman matching the description was identified and arrested in the town of Antioch. When asked her name, she gave it as Emily Dirt. She was escorted to Stockton. Upon examination of her possessions, the officers found Albert McVicar's watch and chain. The case against her had begun to assemble itself piece by piece with the remorseless patience of official record. If you are finding this case as compelling as we are, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue researching and sharing these forgotten stories from history. We also read every comment, so let us know your thoughts on the case below. Now let us continue. Joseph Healy, the plumber from San Francisco, was interviewed by police. He stated that he had been with Emma when she read the morning newspaper and learned that the chest had been opened. She appeared shocked, he said, and told him she would return to Stockton immediately. He accompanied her to the station. Emma, in custody, proclaimed her innocence. She told investigators that a man named Joe Miller had poisoned Albert's drink that evening, that Albert had become insensible and died, and that she had merely assisted in placing the body in the chest out of fear of being accused. Joe Miller could not be found. Police concluded that he was a fiction. The trial of Emma LeDoux opened on the 5th of June, 1906, and in the Superior Court of San Joaquin County, Stockton. The courtroom was well attended. The case had occupied the front pages of the regional press since the discovery of the body, and public interest had not diminished in the intervening weeks. The defense entered its first submission immediately, arguing that their client had already been tried and condemned by newspaper coverage and could not expect a fair hearing from a jury drawn from the surrounding population. The presiding judge noted the argument and proceeded. The prosecution built its case with deliberate care. They presented to the court the evidence of Emma's bigamy, her marriage to Eugene LeDoux in August of 1905, contracted while she remained the lawful wife of Albert McVicar, and they argued that Albert had been close to discovering the truth of his wife's second marriage, that exposure would have undone Emma's arrangement entirely, and that she had devised a plan to prevent it. She had spent his money on furniture, they said. She had redirected that furniture to the home of her other husband. She had sedated him, struck him, placed him in a purchased chest, and arranged for that chest to travel by rail, unmissed and unexamined. A procession of witnesses took the stand. The delivery man who had carried the chest, the hotel manager who had noted the guest's departure, the physician who had treated Albert in San Francisco the previous month and recorded his suspicion of poisoning, and the officers who had opened the chest at the station. Each account corroborated the next, and the defense challenged them in turn and sought to introduce doubt, but the accumulated weight of testimony proved resistant. Emma's own account, the invented figure of Joe Miller, the claim of innocent fear, was tested against the physical evidence and found wanting. The jury was sent out to deliberate at 2:30 on the afternoon of Saturday, the 23rd of June, 1906. After 6 hours of deliberation, they returned to the courtroom. The foreman rose. Emma LeDoux was found guilty of murder in the first degree. The judge pronounced the sentence, death by hanging, to be carried out on the 19th of October, 1906. Emma's expression, as it was recorded by those present, did not alter. It was the first time in the history of the state of California that a woman had been sentenced to death. The sentence was immediately stayed. Emma's defense team filed an appeal to the California State Supreme Court, arguing procedural grounds, and the machinery of the law began its slower operation. The execution date passed without event. The appeal was heard in the summer of 1907. It was not until May of 1909 that the Supreme Court agreed to grant a retrial, setting a new date of the 25th of January, 1910. The retrial, however, never came. The state had calculated the cost of the proceedings at up to $15,000. The defense, for their part, had come to understand that new evidence was unlikely to emerge, and that a second jury, be presented with the same testimony and the same facts, was unlikely to reach a different verdict. On the 26th of January, 1910, Emma LeDoux entered a plea of guilty to a reduced charge. Her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. She was transferred to San Quentin Prison on the western shore of the San Francisco Bay, where she would remain for the next decade. In 1920, she was granted parole. She went to live with her sister and her sister's family in Los Angeles. Within the year, reports reached her parole officer that she had resumed conduct deemed incompatible with the conditions of her release, that she had been seen in circumstances that recalled the old patterns of a woman who had never been able to remain still within the life appointed to her. She was returned to prison. Parole was granted again on the 30th of March, 1925. She married once more, in 1926, a man named Frederick Crackbon. He died in 1929. Without his income, Emma turned to what she knew. She established a correspondence bureau, a lonely hearts agency, as such enterprises were called, which matched single men with eligible women. The only eligible woman, it eventually became apparent, was Emma herself. Her parole officer concluded that this arrangement was in breach of her conditions. In 1931, she was returned to prison for the last time. Emma LeDoux died on the 6th of July, 1941. She was 69 years old. Her body was interred in an unmarked grave at Union Cemetery in Bakersfield. No family announcement was published. No formal notice appeared in the papers that had once carried her name across every county in California. The woman who had been the first in the state's history to receive a sentence of death had come at the last to exactly this: a numbered plot and silence. The wooden chest she had purchased on the morning of the 4th of March, 1906, was retained by the authorities and is today on display at a museum in Stockton. It is a plain thing. Dark wood, iron fittings, a lid that opens and closes without ceremony. Schoolchildren pass it on excursions. Visitors photograph it. Outside the window, the railway still runs through the city. Trains arrive, trains depart. And in the baggage rooms of the world, things are sometimes left behind that no one comes to claim.